Hey folks, this week Jeff Brown from Nashville, Tennessee is going to talk to us about our continued series on truth, doubt, and trust. So grab your Bibles and let's hang on with Jeff, see what he has to say, and we'll see you next week. God bless you.
Winterfest family, I am honored to be with you and excited to share something that really is central to my understanding of faith. I grew up in church. I was like born in church, and there is a chapter in the Bible that we talk about a lot in church. Matthew 28, we talk about it because it holds the Great Commission. But in the middle of Matthew 28, after the resurrection, before the Great Commission, there is a sentence that I don't remember paying attention to in church. Matthew 28:17, right before Jesus sends them out with the Great Commission, Matthew says, they saw him and they worshiped him, and some of them doubted. After they saw Jesus, they worshiped him, and some of them doubted. And some of us still do. I told you I grew up in church. I grew up in a part of the church where it wasn't exactly easy to say that. It felt like everyone around me was certain of everything. And I drank the Kool-Aid. Like we were certain that we belonged to the right church, that we worshiped the right way, that we believed all of the right things. So how do you find the voice to say, I'm not so certain? When it feels like everyone else is debating the way we worship, how do you find the voice to say, I'm not so certain about the one we worship? And so today I want to speak to those of you who aren't so certain, to those of you who have doubt, and to most of you who will. Because if your life is anything like mine, I had some doubt in the first 18 years of life. I've had more in the second 18. In the first half of my life, I had the good fortune and privilege to have life work mostly the way it was supposed to. In the second half, not quite as much. My first job in ministry was with college ministry, and I loved working with students. There was a group of students that I was particularly close to, and one year they went on a spring break mission trip to the Dominican Republic. But they didn't all come back. On the last day of that trip, as they were celebrating the good work they had done, God's work that they were involved in, Shane Ruiz tragically drowned. My best friends were the people there picking up the pieces of the group as it happened. And I want to tell you the questions they came back with. The depression, the doubt was not relegated to just the people on the trip. It's enough to make you wonder, Jesus, are you the one? Are you the one that we are supposed to trust, or should we look for another? And if you've held that question, some of you may be holding that question right now, I want you to know that you're not the only one. This preacher has cradled that question. Jesus, are you the one during phases of my own life? I still come back to that question. And another thing that I don't remember learning about in church was we're not the only ones with that question. John the Baptist asked that very question in Matthew chapter 11. When I say John asked the question, not like when he was 5 years old, but in the end, when he was in prison, after he had baptized Jesus, after he had pointed people to Jesus, Matthew chapter 11, verse 3, John asked, Jesus, are you the one that we are to wait for? Or should we look for another? Now, I told you I grew up in a part of the church where it wasn't easy to say that, but I'm going to tell you it wasn't just my part of the church. We don't know what to do with John, not John your buddy, but John the Baptist who asked that kind of question. Early church fathers had all kinds of explanations about why John the Baptist asked that question. John Calvin, read Matthew 11 and said, it's absurd. It's absurd to think that John wasn't certain in his conviction of Jesus, so clearly he asked to heal the weakness of his disciples. I read that from John Calvin, and I hear Calvin saying, maybe John was asking for a friend. Like, are you going to eat that? I don't want it. I'm asking for a friend. Is your cousin single? I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for a friend. Jesus, are you the one? Know that I'm asking for my friends. I'm going to tell you, I don't think John was asking for a friend. I get frustrated for getting dumped on. When I get dumped on for doing the right thing, I get frustrated. But John wasn't just dumped on. John was in prison. He was incarcerated and about to be executed. John's in prison and Herod is on the throne. Now, how is that the wheat being separated from the chaff? I don't know exactly why John asked the question, but I think it's pretty important that he asked and who he addressed it to. I want to share two words that have been really helpful to me as I think about faith and doubt and faith. Here are the two words. One, confess. Two, consider. First word, confess. We talk a lot about confessing our faith in Jesus and confessing faith to Jesus. I'm talking about confessing not only your faith, but also your fear. Confessing your questions, even your disappointment in God. Confess to Jesus. My friends, when they came back from that trip, several of them said, Jeff, I don't know if I can pray. I just feel like I can't pray. And maybe you've felt like that. Maybe some of you feel like that right now. I feel like I can't pray. And I wonder if our problem isn't prayer, but our narrow definition of it. Because in my Bible, John the Baptist asked, Jesus, are you the one, or should we look for another? In my Bible, Jesus himself asked, why, God? Why have you forsaken me? In my Bible, I feel like every third or fourth psalm, as you flip through it, there's one of those questions. Questions like, why, God? Where were you, God? How could you, God? Now, when's the last time you heard that kind of prayer in church? I'm hopeful, Winterfest students, that some of you will help us reclaim those parts of our Bible. Because I think what my friends were saying when they said, I can't pray, is really, I can't pretend. And I don't think we have to pretend in prayer. You need to know that God is big enough for all of your questions. And so I want to invite you to confess. Confess your faith, but also your fear. Confess your doubt and even your disappointment. But because when we address our questions to God, when we express our frustration in God, it's not the collapse of faith. It's an expression of deep faith. We can't be disappointed in a God that does not exist. So I invite you to confess. Confess to Jesus. But the second word is consider. Consider the work of Jesus. That's what John gets to do. When Jesus answers the question, he comes back to John and says, you go tell John that the blind see, that the lame walk, that people with skin diseases are being healed, that the deaf hear, the dead are being raised, and good news is being proclaimed to the poor. Consider the work of Jesus. Now, you need to know That as we consider the work of Jesus, it doesn't mean everything goes the way I think it should. I'm going to tell you, it doesn't make sense to me that the dead are raised, but John the Baptist is still beheaded. That Jesus can be king and cancer can be common. It doesn't wash away all of our questions, but what it does, if we're not going to pretend, if we're going to be honest, is I hold in one hand my questions, and I also consider the work, the ongoing work of Jesus. Because when I hear that list, the blind see, the lame walk, people with skin diseases are being healed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, good news is being proclaimed to the poor. I see not just an old list, but ongoing work. As I think about just the last week in the life of our church, which is a flawed and fallen group of people. But even among that flawed and fallen group of people, in the last week, there was a group that gathered with people around the city to think about how we can better welcome refugees who are being resettled to our city right here in Nashville. In the last week, I come on that list and I see the lame are walking, and I think about what happened in our parking lot last Saturday. As a good friend who years ago developed ALS was surrounded by an army of people. And literally with two brothers on both sides, they helped him walk. An army of people who reminded us all that we are not alone. In the last week in this church, I think about a family that's currently being surrounded as they walk through a really dark phase. I think about Roy. Roy is currently homeless. He's a friend of many. He's been a member of this church. And I got to watch Roy as he said, I don't want to be a drain. We're trying to help him out with a few things. And Roy said, I don't want to be a drain. And a sister from this church looked him in the eye and said, Roy, you are not a drain. You are made in the image of God. When I think about that work among a flawed and fallen group of people, you want to know who inspires that work? Because it's not me. It's him. It's the resurrected Lord. It's a group of people who say, if we have received mercy, then we have to extend mercy. If we have been welcomed, then we must welcome. And so I want to invite you to try on these two words: confess and consider. Confess. Confess your faith and also your fear. Confess your doubt and even your disappointment. Confess to Jesus and consider. Consider the ongoing work of Jesus, because when we consider that, we catch a glimpse of the one who knows us like no one else. The one who knows everything that you have successfully hidden from everyone else. And yet, knowing that, he loves us like no one else. So confess to Jesus and keep considering the ongoing work of our resurrected Lord.